because even though I'd been a family physician for 20 years at that stage, I was largely working in the area of women's and reproductive health. And I knew nothing
Mhm.
with a capital N about looking after someone with dementia. And I was horrified at my own ignorance. So basically, I just immersed myself in all the latest research on dementia, applied everything I discovered, for better or not. And I ended up caring for my father at home for 9 years until he passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 87 in March 2019.
Welcome to the Alz Authors Podcast. We're so glad you found us. We're the global community of authors writing about Alzheimer's and dementia from personal experience to light the way for others. I'm Marianne Shuko, a registered nurse, author, and dementia daughter.
And I'm Christy Byrne-Yates, a licensed educational psychologist, dementia daughter, Alz author, and coach focused on the sandwich generation. Please join us for bi-weekly episodes with our authors as we talk about their dementia journeys, sharing intimate details and painfully obtained knowledge to help others currently on that path.
We hope these stories offer you comfort and support as we strive to break the silence and stigma surrounding a dementia diagnosis.
May one of our authors speak to your experience.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Hi, Marianne. Good to see you again.
Hi, Christy. Good to be here again.
I am excited for this podcast. This one is so rich with information. We're going to be talking to Dr. Helena Popovic, and she is a physician in Australia who cared for her father, but she has so many really great things, I think, for caregivers, for self-care, but also like just a really optimistic and wonderful outlook about how to manage the care of somebody with Alzheimer's or dementia. And she didn't come by that easily. So she really talks
Mhm.
about her own struggle with coming to terms with this, which I think a lot of caregivers can identify with, but it's so rich.
Absolutely. She's just a treasure trove of information, both personally and professionally. A lot of what she has to share with us is research and scientifically based, evidence-based information that I think a lot of people would really be interested in hearing. Some of it is stuff I hadn't even heard before. She has a very unique perspective. I mean, she is from Australia, so she's from another country than us. And they seem to be on the forefront of a lot of things in dementia world. So I think the listeners are going to have a treat today.
Yeah, I think it's very uplifting, and I love that she really tries to infuse humor in her book, and she shared a little bit of that with us. And so,
Mhm.
but yeah, just like you said, a treasure trove, so many really
Mhm.
good nuggets. So this is exciting. So let's get into it.
All right, let's get started. Hi, Helena. Welcome to the Alz Authors Podcast, Untangling Alzheimer's and Dementia. How are you today, all the way from Australia?
Very well indeed. I'm very excited, even though it's midnight here. I'm bright and bubbly and very excited to speak with you.
I was so glad that you could accommodate our three different time zones to get this podcast done. So that's really exciting. We haven't had too many opportunities to meet with people from Australia. It's quite unique experience. So welcome and thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's delightful to see you, and yeah, we're truly international today, so this is great, and bi-coastal.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So we wanted to discuss with you your dementia journey, your personal journey, as well as your book, In Search of My Father. And you've written more than one book, so we would like to talk about the other book as well, and your professional journey in dementia world. So, get started. Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what led you here?
All right. Well, as a doctor, I now deal with dementia on a daily basis. And as a daughter, I had a very unexpected personal experience with mixed Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. 14 years ago, that was shortly after my mother passed away with lung cancer, I happened to find a box of the medication rivastigmine in the butter compartment of my parents' fridge. Rivastigmine, which has several brand names, you might know it as probably donezepil or Exelon. It's what's known as a cholinesterase inhibitor, and that's a drug that reduces the breakdown of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. And I knew that it was sometimes prescribed in the early stages of Alzheimer's to temporarily slow worsening of symptoms. But I didn't know anyone who had Alzheimer's. So I asked my father who the patches were for. And he says to me, "Oh, your mother said they were good for my memory. So I stick one on every night. I don't know that they do much, but as long as I took them, happy wife, peaceful life." That was how I first learned that Dad had been diagnosed with dementia, because I'd been living 600 miles away from my parents, and I only moved back to care for Mum after she'd been diagnosed with lung cancer. So I'd assumed that Dad's confusion, withdrawal, forgetfulness, depression, that they were all manifestations of grief at losing Mum. But when I tracked down Dad's GP after finding the medication, he confirmed the diagnosis of Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. And this just so threw me, because such was the stigma around dementia in my Serbian family of origin that my parents hadn't even told their only child, their devoted daughter, who also happened to be a doctor, that her father had Alzheimer's. And it actually appeared that Mum hadn't even told Dad his diagnosis, or he forgot, because Dad's mother, my paternal grandmother, had died of Alzheimer's. And I even remember as a child that he'd sworn he would throw himself off a cliff near our home if he were ever diagnosed with dementia himself. So I think that's why Mum never broached the subject with him. And to be honest, I was too scared to openly speak about his diagnosis. So we skirted around it. We talked about his memory lapses. And he kept insisting that declining memory was a normal part of aging. And I just said, well, yeah, maybe, but let's see what we can do to improve it anyway. And the other thing was, he swore he was never going to an aged care residence. So I had to keep him as well as possible so that I'd be able to look after him at home. And that's what threw me into learning everything I possibly could about slowing and even possibly reversing cognitive decline. Because even though I'd been a family physician for 20 years at that stage, I was largely working in the area of women's and reproductive health, and I knew nothing with a capital N about looking after someone with dementia. And I was horrified at my own ignorance. So basically, I just immersed myself in all the latest research on dementia, applied everything I discovered, for better or not, and I ended up caring for my father at home for 9 years until he passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 87 in March 2019.
Wow. I have to tell you, I can very much relate to that feeling of denial, like what you were just saying about, well, I just sort of chalked up his memory lapses to concern about Mom or grief or those kinds of things, because I was in the same boat with my mother. I thought, oh, everybody said, she's her memory. And I said, no, it's just anxiety. She's worried about my dad, and I was a school psychologist. So really did memory testing and cognitive testing with children and young adults, and just couldn't see that, and had to really look at, oh my gosh. So denial, right? Denial, so hard. And like you said, the stigma in your family, I really relate. That's a lot.
Mm.
Yeah, I also had a similar situation with my stepfather, in that, when I lived 250 miles away, so I saw them once a month, but people would call family members or text me and say, something's wrong, something's up with Fred, and what do you do now? And he was always kind of a PIA, pain in the ass. And yeah, he was like a jokester and a prankster. So I would just say, oh, he's just being Fred, and then all of a sudden one time when I went there, it was just unavoidable. Something really was going on. But
Yeah.
people don't want to acknowledge that, I think, because it means there's going to be a lot of change. People don't like change,
No.
you know?
And even after the diagnosis, I still thought, look, maybe they got it wrong.
Exactly.
He might have pseudo-dementia. I don't know if you're
Exactly.
aware of what pseudo-dementia is, the name given to depression in an
Hmm.
older person that
Exactly.
has many of the same features, symptoms of dementia, but it resolves when you treat the depression through counselling or medication or both.
Hmm.
So I kept thinking, look, he's lost mum. Prior to that, he'd lost my mother's maternal grandmother, and they were very close. He was her caregiver. So it was like, no, he's lost his sense of meaning and purpose. And, this really hammers a person's cognition. So if I just give him a reason to re-engage with life, he'll come back to life.
Sure.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's what
Really
I thought.
reaching.
Can't we just give him some antidepressants and he'll be fine?
Mm.
Right,
That's what I
right.
thought. It was like, no.
And yet some antidepressants have anticholinergic properties, so could actually make the cognition worse.
Yep.
But
Right.
but there are cases of pseudodementia. So in some cases it is worth trying.
Right, right, for sure. And it's as a caregiver, as a daughter, right? That's where it's. I think when it's your loved one, somebody you care deeply about, it's very hard to not want to look for all these other pieces, and
Yes.
rightfully so, right? There's nothing wrong. There's nothing bad and horrible and mean spirited. But it's a dynamic of who we are as humans, that these, as a physician, you were probably, it was easier to look because you didn't to diagnose and render decisions for folks or diagnoses for folks. So I totally get it. It makes a lot of sense.
But
Yeah.
I also added another layer as well. Being a physician, I thought, okay, it could be B12 deficiency. It could be a multiple, it could be
Yeah.
multivitamin B deficiency. It could be high homocysteine. It could be underactive thyroid. So we
Hmm.
went, I'd repeated all the tests just in case something had been missed,
Right. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it was dementia.
And
Yes.
that's why it's so important for families to get an accurate diagnosis if
Mhm.
something's wrong with
There
their
are
loved
some
one,
reversals.
because it could be a reversible thing and you need to know what's going on so you can plan and prepare for the future.
Mm, yes.
Mm.
So can you tell us a little bit about why you decided to write this book and put this out there and how that all fits for you right now? What do you?
Well, I've always loved writing. And it started as a way of trying to make sense of what I was experiencing. Like it was such a shock discovery to me that Dad had dementia because remember, I'd been living far away and I only spoke to my parents on the phone every Sunday evening. Yes, I visited several times a year, but my mother was so good at covering up for his lapses, and she was always the dominant one. And he'd never spoken that much when she was around anyway. So I just didn't pick it up. So the diagnosis really came out of left field for me. And for a long time, I kept thinking it was a bad dream. And I
Mhm.
seriously believed I'd wake up and Dad would be back to his former self.
Mm.
Um, so I just write down, what happened that day, what I should have done, what I shouldn't have done, all the things that I was feeling. Um, and when I opened my computer every night, there was the previous day's reflections, and I eventually came to accept that this was my new reality. And then the writing became a way of staying in touch with my friends because I didn't have time during the day. I was totally preoccupied with Dad. And I would just write about what I was experiencing. And after a while, friends and started to say, you should put all your stories in a book. And do you mind if I forward this to someone else I know who has also just got a family member diagnosed with dementia? Your stories are really funny and it would also be useful to carers. And so that's where the book was born. And it is part personal diary, it's part scientific treatise, and it's part practical guide. And it's woven together with humorous anecdotes because I didn't want it to be a heavy or difficult or depressing read. And probably the most common reaction I get is, oh, I didn't really, somebody gave me your book and I didn't really want to read it because I thought I don't want to read something depressing about dementia. And then from page one, I was laughing. So, everyone says they laugh out loud when they read about my bungles. And the other thing, Dad had such a sharp sense of humor, which I just didn't want to get lost. And that's really surprising that he retained his sense of humor till the end, because understanding humor is a complex, cognitively demanding skill. And it's actually, in some cases, I've read research that says, 9 years before they get the diagnosis, sense of humor is one of the first things that goes.
Sure.
Yeah. But above all, I think the book, in retrospect, what I realized the book, and this is why I then called it In Search of My Father, it is an account of searching for my father, the man beyond the diagnosis. And I was searching for the loving bond that Dad and I'd had when I was a child, and which I hadn't realized had eroded over the decades that I'd been living such a long way from my parents. And I went down the self-publishing route and I engaged a publishing project manager who organized the printing and distribution of the book. And he liked the book so much, he wanted to get to know the author. And he's actually been my partner for the last 13 years.
Aww.
So there's another Alzheimer's love story, but I haven't written about that one.
That's
fantastic. So in this process of writing the book and caring for your father, what do you think were some of the most difficult tasks you faced as a caregiver?
The first one was learning to ask for help. I was a doctor. I should have had all the answers. So there was a real sense of failure if I didn't do this right. Well, but that was nobody thought that except me. It was all self-imposed. But I was actually fortunate enough to get a wake-up call early in my caregiving journey, because I ended up in only months, it only took 6 months. I ended up in hospital on IV antibiotics for cellulitis of my leg, which had blown up to the size of a watermelon, and my father was left at home alone. And up until that point, I had never been in hospital before. I just didn't get sick. But here I was with an immune system that had completely broken down, because I was an only child. At that point, I didn't have a partner. I was just doing it all alone. And I quickly realized that I was no good to my father if I was no good to myself. So that was a hard way to learn the lesson, but at least I learned it early. And then I just it's like learning to ask for help is one thing, and also learning to ask for very specific help, because people actually want to help, but they don't know how. So it's being really specific. And I'm pretty sure you've covered this with other authors, but it's worth repeating. It's not just, people, want to help. So you have to say, look, do you know what would really help me? Do you mind just coming and doing some Sudoku or crosswords, or even just sitting watching TV, or taking Dad to the botanical gardens, just so I have an hour? Just so I have an hour to go to, because the second really important thing for me was the self-care part, spending time in nature. So it was just allowing me, just give me an hour. And that hour in nature, walking among the trees, was enough to revitalize me sometimes for the whole week. So, or just saying, look, can you pick up some groceries? I just can't get Dad out of the house today. Do you mind? Just here's the list. I'll email you the list. It's just a few essentials. Could you just pick up these groceries for me? People were delighted to do something simple that made such a big difference to me. So, so learning to ask for help, that was just so important and so hard at the beginning. And the second really hard thing, and I was really lucky, I had another friend who was looking after her mother at the same time, like a very old standing friend. And so we would regularly ring, late at night when both our parents were asleep, we'd get on the phone to each other. And something that we both faced that was really hard was the fine line between nurture and nagging. between supporting and being sergeant major, between keeping dad safe and encouraging self-efficacy, because I didn't want him to trip over. I didn't want him, to injure himself. But at the same time, it was so important that he kept physically active, that he did strength training, because the stronger our muscles, the stronger our mind. The link between strength training and memory and cognition now is unequivocal. And, one of the fastest ways to erode your brain is to just let your muscles waste away. So, I had to, make sure that he was physically active, but at the same time, I wanted to make sure that he wasn't going to injure himself. Driving was another issue. Food was another issue. I really wanted to get nutritious food into him, but I also recognized from the research that a good relationship with him, not being stressed, peaceful, joyful meal times filled with laughter were actually more important than getting the broccoli into him. Yeah. And that was hard coming from a physician's perspective, because as a physician, you train that the practical things are the most important. And I think this is the biggest problem with aged care residences, nursing homes, however you call them, is they're task oriented. They've got to tick off the shower and they've got to tick off the meals. But it'd actually be more important to sit down and have a chat than to force them into the shower. Like, who cares if they miss a shower in a couple of times a week? That human connection is more important. So that fine line, to this day, I find that the hardest thing, the fine line between supporting and taking over.
So true. So true. It's connection. It's connection that's so important. And I use the phrase connection over correction. We want to say,
yes.
No, especially when they misspeak or they say, no, I don't know that. Yes, you do. And we want to correct rather than saying, say more, or, oh, that's interesting. And just the connection is what is so vital. Absolutely. I like what you said. Nurture versus nagging. That's very good. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And the asking for help is so key. And that's so incredibly important. Absolutely.
And the other thing too, it doesn't matter if somebody doesn't do it as well as you. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They may not make the meal exactly as you, they might not make, the meatballs the way you would have made them. Who cares? Like, we've got to really get our priorities right.
Exactly. Exactly. There's this sense that, well, it has to be exact because this is what he's used to. And in fact, just like children. And I don't like to equate that, right? Because we are talking about our adults, and this is how we should, I believe, honor them as the adults that they are. But humans, I guess, we all get into our routines, but you're absolutely correct.
But being childlike is a positive. Being playful is a positive. So I don't see that as a negative. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I get that. I'm thinking about when sometimes I'll hear people talking to their elders as if they were toddlers, and we maybe need to think about how we do that. But what you're saying too, this is so key for caregivers, is your person will be able to do more than this thing more than one way. They really can. Yes. And yes, your meatballs might be different. In fact, you might decide you're going to cook something else. That's okay.
Yes.
Okay. So, been talking about, you were saying self-care, getting out into nature. What were some other things that were self-care activities that were so critical for you?
Number one, having a gratitude practice. So every morning before I woke up, I would, depending if I had the time, I would write it down. And if I didn't, I would not get out of bed until I reflected on at least 5 things that I felt profoundly grateful for. And I'm telling you, that absolutely changes how I approach the day. You just walk out of the bedroom just going, I'm alive, he's alive, we have a relationship. There's all you actually prime your brain to continue noticing things to be grateful for. And it has a physiological effect on your body. Number one, it releases oxytocin, the bonding chemical. It releases serotonin, endorphins when you think about things you're grateful for. And it strengthens your immune system. It lowers your blood pressure. It lowers your cortisol. So it set me up physically and mentally, and I still do it. Set me up physically and mentally to be just better equipped to deal with whatever happened during the day. And the second thing that I did with Dad, and I started it for him, but again, I've continued it for me, was we came up with the idea of a gratitude box. So we wrapped this box in beautiful paper, and anytime something happened that we felt grateful for, and I wanted to encourage him to see if that might, help him preserve his memory. It's a lot, we'd write down what we felt grateful for, whether it was, having a lovely encounter with somebody at a coffee shop, or somebody had helped us with carrying things to the car, or we were just grateful that our long-awaited orchid had finally bloomed, anything like that, or just really grateful that I got, finally got, cooked the salmon to absolute perfection, melt in your mouth, not too dry, not too raw. We would just really look for things to be grateful for, or, just, chance beautiful visit from a friend that we didn't expect. So anyway, we'd write it down and we'd put it in the gratitude box. And then every World Gratitude Day, which, wait for this, is on September the 21st, which also happens to be World Alzheimer's Day. We would, when I had my partner there, the three of us would sit there and we would go through everything we'd written in the past year that we'd been grateful for. And it was better than Christmas, better than opening Christmas presents. And we'd never even get through them all because we'd go, oh, I had completely forgotten about that. And, it took off on another conversation. And Dad would rarely remember them, but I think I got this from Laurie LeBay, Alzheimer Speaks. Facts fray, but feelings stay. He wouldn't necessarily, remember details, but he would always remember that we'd had a great night. People don't remember, if he had a good, like later I actually got other professional carers to help me so I could start going back to work part-time. He wouldn't remember what he'd done with the caregiver, but he always remembered that he had a wonderful time. Because I'd say, sometimes I'd forget. So what did you do? We had a wonderful time. He would smile. And that's all I needed. I didn't need to know what they did. It was just great. He really, really enjoyed himself. So gratitude was a huge one. Just any time in nature was a huge one. And I also, towards the end, discovered breath work. And that this has actually even been found to improve cognition, reduce depression, reduce anxiety, reduce stress. So the first one I learned was box breathing. So anytime I was stressed, it was just slow, say 4 counts, slow, deep breaths in. 4 counts, you hold the breath. 4 counts, you breathe out. 4 counts, you hold the breath. Just doing that for 5 minutes, the research has shown, again, that sets you up for a less reactive day. I was less likely to react, if you push my buttons or whatever happened. And then I discovered the literature, the science says that what's even more powerful is a technique called cyclic sighing. And that's where you breathe in as deeply as you can. And then you breathe in just a little bit more. You take a second inhalation, and then you breathe out as slowly as possible. Now, this is going to freak out listeners who know about the plaques and the tangles that are the hallmarks of Alzheimer's. The slower your out breath, the greater your vagal tone. The vagus nerve is part of the sympathetic nervous system, which is part of our rest and digest system, which calms us down, lowers our blood pressure, helps us, keep an even keel. But what the research has also found is that it actually reduces amyloid plaques it reduces because they could only measure it in plasma, the amyloid and the tau concentration in plasma, which means it potentially, I mean, this is what the drugs are trying to do. It potentially it could slow cognitive decline.
Oh, that's so wonderful to hear. Yeah. Yeah.
And the third one, which I just have to mention this because it's hot off the press research, because this is what I do now. I just get out and try and find everything I can to improve cognition, reduce cognition. We know that we need to stimulate all our senses to keep our brain healthy. You've no doubt heard of the Lancet report, which has come with the 2024 Lancet Commission has identified 14 modifiable risk factors for dementia. And I won't go through all 14 of them, but one is untreated midlife hearing loss. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if you get your hearing, this is a simple one. Get your hearing checked. If you need hearing aids, get hearing aids. Now, Dad had needed hearing aids for years, but he just refused to wear them. So Mum had given up. When I took over care, right at the start, I didn't realize hearing loss was such a big deal. When I read that research, okay, that was a battle that I was then, you pick your battles. That was going to be a non-negotiable. And so he still wouldn't wear them. So what I had the audiologist do, he was a lovely 80-something-year-old man who came to your house. So I said, okay, the only way we're going to do this is if you make me a fake pair of hearing aids that look exactly like his. And so every morning I go, look, this is really important for everybody, okay? I'm a doctor. I know these things. I'm wearing them. You're wearing them. So we put one in my ear, one in your ear, one in my ear, one in your ear. So it was like I was wearing earplugs for the morning. But at least it was like, well, if my daughter's doing it, then I'll do it. And then, when he wasn't looking, I'd take them out and with my hair, you couldn't tell. And then after a while, once he got used to it, as part of his routine. But the point I'm trying to make is looking after our hearing, looking after our vision. Untreated vision loss is also a risk factor. But the biggest one of all is untreated loss of smell, which is called olfaction. And they've now found that with olfactory training, and I'll explain what that is in a moment, but it's basically exercises to improve your smell have actually been found to massively improve cognition, whether you're young, whether you're old. It is the most powerful intervention. It's got better, if you compare what aducanumab, lecanemab, donanemab, they at best slow decline in some people by maybe 30%, maybe. Slow decline. They don't improve things, they just slow decline. Whereas the actual stimulating your sense of smell actually improves cognition, improves scores in memory tests. So you can do it one of several ways. One is you get, say, 4 different smells, and every night for 20 seconds, lavender, cloves, rose, eucalyptus. It doesn't matter as long as you find it pleasant and as long as it's a pure smell, not a mixed berry or a mixed citrus. It's got to be lemon, not citrus. So you stimulate yourself 20 seconds each night for 4 different smells. But the easier one is you buy a diffuser and you put your essential oil in there for 2 hours while you sleep. End of story. That's how they did it in the research. So now every single Alzheimer's patient, that's one of the first things I tell them to do.
Wow. Interesting.
Wow, that's so fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would put lavender on the dementia patients. Mainly my objective was to try to keep them calm.
Yes, that too.
But it was kind of like the same thing. So a little lavender oil on their clothing or on like a cotton ball that would be near them so they could smell it.
Well, and I took a course for a dementia care specialist. So I took that certification, and one of the things they recommend was using essential oils to stimulate different things. Like there are some aromas, essential oils that really stimulate the desire to eat. And so sometimes you'll have people who refuse food. So, finding things that can help people, and definitely the lavender for calming, but some other ones that kind of, and colors too, just different things. But it's just that, our senses are so tied to our memory, and really, so that's critical information. That's really great. Thank
Yes,
you.
it
Yeah,
is.
that's a good point, Christy, because people who no longer feel like they want to eat, people who have dementia, one of the first start of digestion is smell. Like as soon as you smell like your meal is coming in, all of a sudden it wakes everything up. It's like, oh, we're going to eat now, and it starts getting your gastric juices going and the digestive process rolling. But if people aren't smelling that, that's not going
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
So maybe
Right.
they don't
Right.
realize, oh, this is something I want to do. This is good.
Right.
They don't want to
Right.
be bothered.
Right. Right. So
Yeah.
all those
That's
things.
fascinating.
The other thing I found with Dad was, I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody listening knows the power of music in terms of
Mm,
stimulating memory. I mean, playing music from their childhood or significant times in their life or their wedding. Music is actually more powerful in evoking memories than are photos.
hmm
And music can also, just make them come alive. So to get Dad in the shower, singing in the rain, it worked. It absolutely worked. And getting him to eat, he loved Julie Andrews. So it would be either something from Mary Poppins or The Sound of Music or any music that lifted him up. It would actually help me to get him to eat because there were days when he didn't want to eat either.
hmm
Yeah. Yeah. That's so fascinating and really great, great information. Yeah.
Well, talking about eating though, like eating is exhausting. So especially for people who
Mhm.
have like heart problems or lung problems, the whole process of eating and digesting
Yes, it
is
is.
exhausting. So people don't really want to do it. And then people tend to rush through the meal. Especially like if you're in a care home, they have X amount of time to feed like all these
Yeah.
people, and so they don't have enough time to start with. So they want to rush, 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 and shove food into people's mouths. And people, though, they don't want that. And it's
Yeah.
exhausting. Even just chewing, masticating is
And,
exhausting.
and chewing is actually necessary to also maintain brain function.
hmm
Like we just have to we know that mental stimulation is really important. Social stimulation is probably number one. I've got several mantras. People are more powerful than pills, hands down. Loneliness is as damaging as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Yeah.
Loneliness and smoking are both there as right up there as top risk factors, for dementia. Um, and a dance a day keeps dementia away because it stimulates you mentally, physically, socially, and it brings joy. And joy is healing. Like,
hmm
you know, with time, when I first started out, my priority was and not to lessen the importance of this, but my priority was every soft drink is a bullet to the brain because soft drink gives you that massive rush of sugar, and people with Alzheimer's have glucose hypometabolism. They can't, number one, they can't use sugar for fuel as well as they used to. So there's no point filling them up with sugar, even though they crave it because their brain is lacking in energy. But sugar also, that massive rush of sugar actually, I won't go through the biochemistry, but it drains the brain of energy. So drinking soft drinks, I would arguably say in terms of food, is the absolute worst thing we can do to our brain. I'd ban soft drinks. If I was health minister of this country, I would ban soft drinks. I'd make them illegal because I just think they're that damaging. So Dad subsisted on lemonade. Like he only drank lemonade and coffee. The coffee I was fine with the coffee, but I was not fine with the lemonade. And so of course he wasn't going to give it up. And what does his daughter know? I've been drinking lemonade all my life. It's done me no harm. Right. So, so I used to dilute. I'd always pour it out. And so we'd start with, probably, 4/5 lemonade and 1/5 sparkling mineral water. And when he got used to that, each time I would I'm talking, this took months. It didn't happen over a week. It took several months. And I diluted the lemonade until he was just drinking mineral water. And dementia probably helped. He'd forgotten that he ever even drank, lemonade, and then mineral water became the staple. but the point I'm trying to make is, yeah, in the early days, it was ticking boxes for me too. And then in the later stages, as the more I cared for him, yes, we give your brain a reason to stay sharp, and it more likely will. Like, we did volunteer work with Meals on Wheels. We were the dad and daughter team. That was amazing for him. That gave him a helper's heart. I was obviously the driver, and he would take the food, to the people in the door. And sometimes we were their only social contact. It was just heartbreaking. And we'd always come home feeling gratitude that we had each other, that we had friends, that we were regularly socializing with people. So anyway, yeah, what I'm trying to say is I soon realized that joy is the greatest healer of all. That just what can you do to spark joy? Doesn't matter what it is. What can you do? Try not to make it a sugary treat, because it's a backhanded thing. Too much sugar and you are going to make them worse. But just what is something that they really enjoy? Whether it's walking, sometimes like Dad loved Bunnings. Oh, you probably don't know what Bunnings is. It's a hardware store. Just walking the aisles of Bunnings. Now, I couldn't think of anything more boring, but just walk. It got his steps in. It was physical exercise. It was like, sort of going, oh, what might we fix around the house? Not that we were ever going to do anything to the house, but all I'm saying is, walking him through Bunnings. So what if I found it boring? The joy it gave him compensated the boredom for me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. That's so true.
All of this is just wonderful tips, I think, that people are going to walk away from after listening to you. Helena, it was great. Thank you.
That's great. That's my goal.
Yeah. So did you prepare something to read
Oh,
from your
yes, I
book?
did. I certainly did. I thought I might read the foreword, which is just a page, because that sort of sets up the book. And then I would read, depending on the time, one or two really short chapters to give you an illustration of some of the stuff I recorded. So, okay. So here's the foreword. And I always had an inspiring quote at the start of each chapter. So this one's by Robert McKee. People are not inspired to act on reason alone. In a story, you arouse your listeners' emotion and energy. We are the architects and builders of our own brains. For millennia, however, we were oblivious to our enormous creative capabilities. We had no idea that our brains were changing in response to our actions and attitudes every day of our lives. So we unconsciously and randomly shaped our brains and our latter years because we believed we had an immutable brain that was at the mercy of our genes. Nothing could be further from the truth. The human brain is continually altering its function, cell number, circuitry, and chemistry as a direct result of everything we do, experience, think, and believe. This is called neuroplasticity. With a wealth of research and clinical experience as its foundation, this book began as a step-by-step guide to moulding our brains into lifelong peak performers. A peak-performing brain means we're sharp, focused, creative, and resilient. It means we're fast learners, resourceful thinkers, and effective problem solvers. It means we have a good memory for the duration of our lives. It means we substantially reduce our risk of degenerative brain disorders such as Alzheimer's disease, other dementias, stroke, Parkinson's, and depression. It means we remain in possession of our mental faculties and live meaningful, fulfilling lives until our last days. And best of all, we're never too old, too young, or too far gone to make positive, life-expanding, extraordinary changes. This book isn't just about preserving brain function as we age. It's about enhancing performance, effectiveness, health, and joy at every age and stage of life. However, the book took a different direction when my mother died and I was left to care for my frail, elderly father in the early stages of dementia. Full of energy, enthusiasm, and scientific arrogance, I set about to redesign my father's brain. But life has a way of interfering with our plans. I found I was not dealing with a willing, motivated patient, but a grief-stricken, self-doubting man. And I underestimated the impact of the experience on my own life. Eventually, I stopped resisting the hand that life had dealt me and learned to fuse my personal trials with my medical training. The result is this book, which weaves science into story, reflection into research, past into present, and humour into healing. The interplay of science and personal story, in which the names have been altered to respect privacy, allows you to switch from analytical left brain evaluation of the facts to a right brain creative exploration of the possibilities for your own life. Stories are more powerful in effecting change and making messages stick than is straight knowledge. Knowing something is great, but implementing knowledge is the real goal.
That was so powerful. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Fantastic. Now I have to buy it.
And I thought I'll just share a really short story of just some of the things that we got up to. So the chapter is called Ironing. And the quote is from Thomas Edison. "I'm not discouraged because every wrong attempt discarded is another step forward." Having just completed 2 huge loads of washing, I was faced with a large pile of ironing, mostly my father's clothes, because I generally don't buy something if it needs ironing. In particular, I had to iron the shirt Dad would wear to the opera on Saturday. I'm just going to interrupt here. The other thing I did was to look for, there's all these resources out there that we don't know. That's something you often say, that are so helpful. Now, I don't know if you have it in your country, but we have something called the companion card. And that means whoever takes the person with it's got to be a permanent disability, it's got to be dementia or a permanent disability. The carer does not pay for the opera, for the ballet. And these things are expensive. Opera, ballet, movies, entry to theme, anything that you want to go and do, the companion goes for free. So this was my bribery. Like, I did take Dad sometimes, but I didn't particularly like the opera. I was happy with the ballet. I like that. I was happy with the symphony, but the opera. So, I would offer this, would you like to see this movie with Dad? Would you like to see the opera? And this was, older ladies who were on their own, who just thought this was the best thing because I only had to pay for Dad. I didn't have to pay for them. So it was a win-win. So anyway, I'm just telling people, if you've just see if you've got something like the companion card, which is like gold. Okay. So for years, my mother had subscribed to the opera with a woman I'd never met. When my mother died, I phoned my mother's friend and asked if she'd consider going with my father instead. She agreed on the proviso that because she was 90 years old, sharp as a tack, we would pick her up and bring her home after the performance. I agreed and found her to be a delightful woman, so I didn't mind playing chauffeur. As soon as I pulled out the iron, my father asked what I was doing. "Well, the shirt you plan to wear to the opera needs ironing, and your other clothes from the wash could do with it too." "Oh, you don't need to do the ironing," he informed me. "Your mother never did the ironing. I take it to a woman who lives a few blocks away, and we pay her to do it." "Oh, that sounds good," I said. "But will she get it done by Saturday?" "Yeah, she does it straight away." "Do you mean to tell me you stay the whole time while she does the ironing?" I tried to suppress the glint in my eye. "Even if it's a few hours worth?" "Well, it's never been a few hours worth of ironing, but yes, I feel I'm doing my bit of social service if I stay and talk to her." "How lovely of you. I think that's admirable. Do you want to give her a ring?" "No, I'll just take it straight there. She's always home." Wow, a few hours to myself. It was going to be a luxury I hadn't enjoyed in a long time. The list of things I could accomplish flashed before my eyes, and before I knew it, I was pulling out as many shirts and shorts of my own that I could crumple up and add to the pile. I managed to fill an entire suitcase. "There you go," I said, presenting the load to my father. "I'll wheel it to the car for you. And here, take her a box of chocolates. See you later." The door clicked shut, and I was on my own. I felt like a kid in a lolly shop. My bliss was soon shattered. Dad returned within 15 minutes, suitcase in tow. "Isn't she home?" I asked. "No, she's in hospital having surgery on her leg. I happened to bump into her daughter, who had arrived to collect the mail, so you'll have to do the ironing after all." I felt ill, not only because I'd lost the gift of a few precious hours of solitude, but because I'd wickedly crumpled up my own clothes to add to the workload. 2.5 hours later, I was ready to hurl the iron over the back fence.
That was great.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So
Oh,
So
that's
just,
that's
always the
excellent.
way,
Thank you
huh?
so much for sharing that story. It's great. And though that tip too, I know that my brother's disabled and he wants to take like a cross country tour on the Amtrak, and he keeps telling us, I can bring a carer for free. So I think those are
Wow.
some things that might exist here, but I never really ran into it. What about you, Christy? Did you ever have that?
I'm not aware of it, but I'm like, okay, we're going to find out.
Mm.
So
yeah.
yeah, that's a
And
very
it might be
good,
a state, but like this was a national thing. So it didn't
Yeah,
matter where you lived in Australia. It was, you could go anywhere, interstate, whatever.
for sure.
Um, but in the US, it might be a state by state thing. Who knows?
Yeah,
yeah.
and it could even be county level. There's so many
Yeah.
facets, but
Hmm.
I mean, there are definitely programs to help people, and it may be matinees and things like that. But yeah, that's really worthwhile checking out because
Mm.
I
Yeah.
think those kinds of things are very important for people. And
Hmm.
yeah, great.
Yeah. I just realized last week we went on a hike in one of the state parks and they had some kind of golden age pass or whatever. So seniors, and it was like 60 and above, were
Yeah.
admitted free into state parks and things. So that was, it was only $10 savings, but, we appreciated that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
If that's what gets you out, then it's a good
Yeah.
thing. And that's nature, right?
Yeah.
There's your nature. We had a nice nature walk.
Yes.
Well, you've given us so much to think about. I wanted to ask a couple other things. If someone if someone were to say to you today that they've discovered or learned that a loved one had dementia, what would be your response?
The first thing I would say is please don't believe there's nothing you can do to improve your loved one's brain function. Don't believe that dementia is an inevitable downhill slide. Don't believe that dementia is an end point. It's a starting point. It could actually be, a doorway to a more meaningful, joyful, socially connected life. Understand that the practice of medicine is decades behind the science, and that so many care providers in this country, whether they're doctors, neurologists, geriatricians, still just say to people, when you get a diagnosis, look, just get your affairs in order. You might want to try some Suvanade. You might want to go on a trial. You might want to try one of the older medications. But basically, just things are going to get worse. And that's not necessarily the case. As I said, number one, if you give your brain a reason to stay sharp, it more likely will. So maintaining a sense of meaning and purpose and joy and laughter and awe. And I know this from firsthand experience. Caregiving is going to be challenging, however you go about it. So you might as well put your energy into doing things that will help preserve your loved one's brain function and possibly even restore it. And this is actually where I run into trouble because other healthcare professionals accuse me of giving false hope, to which I respond, heed the words of Confucius. People who say it cannot be done should not interrupt those who are doing it. There is no such thing as false hope. Hope is hope. It's not a guarantee. It offers a window of possibility. And dementia, more than any other disease, just giving things a go, just trying something new, just staying positive actually improves brain function. And I'm also very conscious of not making people feel that they are to blame for their dementia, because people go, well, if you're telling people can do something about it, are you saying they caused it? Absolutely not. We live in an inherently stressful, sleep-deprived, unhealthy world. That's just the current state of the Western world. So what I'm trying to do is empower people to become proactive about their brain health as early as possible. So ironically, I really start with joy. Just seek out things that are meaningful, joyful, connect you to other people. Do the simple stuff first. Do you have high blood pressure? Well, get that treated. Are you doing any form of physical activity? Just find some form of movement that you enjoy, do it. Do you have enough social contact with other people? Let's have a look at your diet. Is it too sugar heavy? Are you eating enough protein? Because we need more protein as we age rather than less. Have we checked for obstructive sleep apnea? Because, I've had patients who were convinced that they had dementia. You put them on a CPAP machine and suddenly the brain fog disappears, and it was just they weren't getting oxygen while they slept. Are you undergoing chronic stress at the moment? Can you relieve as much stress as possible? Because stress, produces cortisol. Cortisol actually attaches to cells in the hippocampus and erodes brain function and brain cells. So can we remove as much stress as possible? Have you been to the dentist recently? Because we now know that poor dental health is a risk factor for heart disease, arthritis, but also Alzheimer's and other dementias. And people are like, what's the connection there? Well, the bacteria causing gum disease, Porphyromonas gingivalis, can travel to the brain and damage your hippocampus and other areas connected to memory and learning. So, sometimes just getting better fitting dentures and just making sure you haven't got some underlying gum disease.
Right.
So just looking at all of that, all of those things can contribute to cognitive decline. So work on the things that you can. Untreated depression. There's another really powerful one, which, well, it's debatable whether, if you look at the work of Gabor Mate and Bessel van der Kolk, childhood trauma changes the brain. It increases the risk of depression and anxiety and mental health diseases and autoimmune diseases. And if you survive all of them, it'll increase your risk of dementia. So is there unresolved trauma? Address that as early as possible, because once you get a diagnosis, then it's really hard to address past trauma. But if there's unresolved emotional, something heavy, an emotional burden that you're carrying, you can't, you can suppress it so it's not visible to anybody else, but it's working its damage in your body. It's eroding your immune system. It's increasing your risk of cancer. Emotions have power. So, and that's why joy is so healing, like genuine joy. And you can compensate, if you exercise regularly, if you have great sleep, if you have a really good, Mediterranean style diet, eating lots of, dark leafy greens and oily fish and avocado and raw nuts and all of that stuff, you can mitigate some emotional trauma, but it's going to catch up with you in one way or another at some point. So I think I sort of went a very long-winded way of answering that question. What would I say to somebody if they said to you, my loved one has dementia? I would just say, don't despair. Educate yourself as much as possible. I would tell them, listen to Alzheimer's podcast, listen to Laurie LeBay, Alzheimer's Speaks, go to Dementia Map. I would just go, look, there is so much information out there that you don't know. Intuitively, like there's so many, read my books, but if my books don't speak to you, then someone else's books will. There is so much information out there, and a common theme with Alzheimer's, you're not alone. There are so many other carers out there.
Yeah.
That would just, that you can connect with online or in real life.
That's so great. Thank you so much. I think those are great offerings for folks, and just not to despair, because it's really easy to go down that rabbit hole of, oh my gosh, this is just the worst thing possible. And we think of all the terrible things. And then I think your words are also about not just what you could do for your person, but those are words to heed for yourself, your own life. Like, where are you finding the joy? Where are you finding, how are you eating? How are you sleeping during this time period? Because you're stressed and all of that's happening. And so, really it's an opportunity to kind of right your own ship if you're struggling with some things.
Yes.
So I think that's really important.
And we know carers are right up there with having the poorest health in the community because they don't give themselves the nurture they need. And one other thing, sorry, I would say to somebody that said my loved one has dementia, one of the greatest gifts you can give to that person is to focus on what's strong, not wrong. Like continue to reinforce what they still can do. And like you've said this in all your podcasts as well, they don't change overnight once they get a diagnosis. It's a very well, sometimes it's faster than other times, but change doesn't happen overnight. And so I loved one of your authors, and I don't remember who it was, said, don't take away the vacuum cleaner.
Right.
You don't suddenly stop them doing everything. You just keep a watchful eye, and you keep encouraging the things that they can do so that they can keep doing them.
Right. Right.
If the dad made his own coffee, can you make, and I would sometimes just go, can you make me a cup of coffee? He'd say to me, I said, oh, I was just about to ask you if you could make me a cup of coffee. Do you mind? I'd really, and it was just so that he would continue to remember that, because they forget.
Yes. Yes.
They can forget everything.
Right, right. I mean, absolutely keep them doing as much as they can, and being, there's some discernment there. Like maybe you're going to have to take away the paying of bills because those might not be getting done well, right? But the coffee for sure, the vacuuming, absolutely. I mean, so it's very true. It's keeping them involved and all of that. Yeah, very true. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our group before we wrap up? Any other last bits of wisdom, things you would like to let people know about what you're doing? Oh, and then I want you to tell us where we can find you and what you're up to.
Okay. So currently I am promoting the sequel to In Search of My Father, because readers asked for it, basically. Because the first book, In Search of My Father, Dementia is No Match for Daughter's Determination, that really only covered my first year of caregiving. And then people wanted to, and, I sort of left it. We were going to get a pet dog, and there were some other scenarios and experiences that hadn't resolved yet. So people wanted to know what happened next. So I listened. And then last year I wrote the sequel, which is Can Adventure Prevent Dementia? A Guide to Outwitting Alzheimer's. Careful choice of words, because you can outwit it. In terms of it doesn't have to rob you, and it doesn't have to rob the carer nor the sufferer of life. And people describe that as the Bible of brain health. That goes into a lot more detail in terms of how to look after your brain, and a very, very detailed sort of look into how I cared for him and continued to care for him for those 9 years. So that's my biggest focus now is getting the word out about the sequel. I've also created brain boosting cards. I call them wild cards, and they're a deck of cards, 20 cards, 20 ways to boost your brain. And you can go to my website and download a PDF of games that you can play with the cards. And the reason I call them wild cards is because the brains of wild animals are 15 to 30% larger than the brains of their tame domestic counterparts. So what is it about being wild that boosts your brain? Well, here are 20 ways, of getting wild. And it's everything from attitude, like they've actually found that if you believe that memory loss is an inevitable part of getting old, you are more likely to have more severe memory loss. And it's not your genes, it's your belief system. It's that powerful. So it's everything from, maintaining a positive attitude towards aging, maintaining a sense of curiosity, awe and wonder, to, eating a handful of nuts and blueberries and, the practical stuff as well. So that's what the 20 wild cards are. So they're a bit of fun. And then I've written another book, which doesn't sound like it's related to dementia or caregiving, but it's all about self-care. But the people who really need a book about self-care are not going to buy it. So I called it Neuro Slimming, Let Your Brain Change Your Body. And it's how to shed excess body fat without dieting or deprivation. And to practical ways it relates to dementia is because midlife visceral obesity, that is having fat, belly fat, and having type 2 diabetes doubles your risk of dementia. And that book addresses both of those. So if you do everything in that book, you will eliminate obesity and eliminate type 2 diabetes. But what it really is a book about is self-care, self-nurture, and self-love. It's about feeding your spirit, not starving your body. And that is what, caregivers need more than anything, to recognize the importance, the power, and the simplicity of self-nurture and the difference it will make, because the greatest gift that we can give to the people we care about are our life force, our energy, our enthusiasm, our passion. And Dad could pick up on my energy. I could try, if because went back to work after a while, not full-time, but part-time, because I had to pay for the caregivers. But if I'd had if I was exhausted and just frustrated, but I'd try and fake being positive, didn't work. He would pick up on my poor energy and frustration, and he would pick up on it. So the most important thing I could give him would be genuine joy, love, enthusiasm. So just looking after ourselves is just in itself already looking after the other person. And I just can't make that case enough. And it's once you get a rhythm going, and Dad and I would go to the gym together. So I'd have my workout, he'd have his workout. We know, okay, so he wouldn't maybe put his bike or his treadmill on the same resistance that I would, but it didn't matter. I got my workout. Even if he was only cheating, it didn't matter. I got my workout.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can, what's the name of your website? What is that called?
Okay, my website is drhelenapopovic.com. Or if you want to go straight to the dementia stuff, then it's adventurepreventsdementia.com. And I have so much free information on my websites. I've got TV and radio interviews I did, talks I've given, articles I've written, and it's all about dementia, brain health, preventing Alzheimer's, and slowing cognitive decline after a diagnosis. And as for my books, you can get all my books as paperback, ebook, audiobook. So Amazon, Kindle, any bookstore, wherever you buy ebooks and audiobooks, or you can get them directly from my website. So whatever's simplest for you. And I just want to give my narrators a plug. I had 2 people narrating both of my dementia books. A woman reading my lines and a man reading Dad lines, because there's a lot of conversation in the book, and they did such a great job. The man even did the Serbian accent really well. So I can't thank them enough for putting their heart and soul into bringing our story to life. And people just absolutely love the audiobook because it's just so well read. So I have to say I'm really grateful to them.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. Thank you. That's so great.
Sounds great.
It's been such a pleasure talking with you, and so much information. This is really, really good stuff. So thank you for sharing all of this. And
I
forgot one more thing. I also write a free weekly blog called Healthy Bites. Excellent. Just go to my website and sign up. And that's a way of just getting, every week you'll get a brain booster or a personal experience or an insider reflection. So that's, that's a really good way. And there you'll sort of learn if I'm doing a public talk somewhere or a library talk, so we can meet up in person.
Fantastic. Oh, that's great. Thank you. I like that. Again, it's been a pleasure. It's so great. We're so glad that you're part of our Al's Authors family now, and we'll be sharing this book widely. So that's great.
Thank you so much.
So lovely to meet you.
You too. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege to meet you both. And I just think you're doing amazing, wonderful work.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Untangling Alzheimer's and Dementia, an Al's Authors podcast. For more details on this episode, please see the show notes. If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a review and subscribe to it on whichever platform you use to listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information on All's Authors, please visit allsauthors.com. While you're there, be sure to browse our online bookstore, where you will find hundreds of carefully vetted books on Alzheimer's and dementia. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Please email your thoughts on the podcast to allsauthors@gmail.com. We are a 501c3 charitable organization, totally reliant on donations to do what we do. If our authors' stories move you, please consider contributing to our cause. Remember, you are not alone. One can sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir and create harmony.
I'm Vicki Tapia from All's Authors. If you enjoy the podcast, you'll enjoy reading more of our authors' stories in one of our anthologies, Alzheimer's and Dementia Caregiving Stories. Each volume offers a wealth of information and a preview of each title to help you pick the perfect resource. You'll find them on our free resources page at allsauthors.com with a variety of caregiver tip sheets. So after the podcast, take a few minutes to check it out. Remember, you are not alone.